It's great to see everyone tonight and thankful for our visitor that's with us tonight. And I want to thank Fred for leading that song. It does go along with the lesson tonight. And the title of the lesson is Keep Cool Even When You're Hot. I know Milton recognizes that title. And I have to really thank him for this lesson, because not long ago he preached and he talked about a book, Making Things Right, by Dr. Paul Faulkner. And I'm sure most of us remember Faulkner and Burkina Faulkner, who did the marriage enrichment seminars. And it's really a great book on Christian attitudes and Christian behavior. So I do recommend it. After he talked about it, I got it and I read it, and I really like this chapter about controlling our anger. And I like the way he started the chapter. He talked about a woman called him at about 2 a.m. one morning, and she said, "Are you the preacher down there at such and such place?" And he said, "Yes." "And who are you?" And she wouldn't tell him who she was, but she told him that her husband had threw a bowling ball through the window, and that he was drunk, and that he had thrown his trophies, bowling trophies, into the color TV and tore it all up, and that he had turned over the china cabinet and broke all of his wife's crystal. And so she wanted to know, could he come over and talk to them? Now, this is 2 a.m. in the morning. And he said he didn't see himself being a superhero of any sort that would rush in to save a damsel in distress. And he talked about how dangerous that could be, because we all hear about police officers that go into those situations, and sometimes they get hurt, sometimes they get killed. And so he said he didn't go over there, but he told them that if they wanted to come to the building the next day, he'd meet with them in the office, but they didn't come. And then a couple months later, this woman calls him back, and she says, "You remember me? And I'm the one that told you about my husband tearing up everything." And he said, "Sure, I remember you." And she said, well, this time she was drunk, and she said, "I did it." So she had torn up things. And what he said is, he said, "Folks, I don't have to tell you, that's not normal behavior, and it causes all kinds of problems. It's not smart to get angry and lose control like that, and when we do that, it doesn't make sense. It's not normal behavior. Alexander the Great killed his best friend in a rage of anger, and that's very tragic. And living in a nuclear age as we do today, we could be just one rage away from annihilation. So uncontrolled anger is dangerous. And the first point I want to make about anger is we must get a handle on it. A quick flash of anger can demolish our best controls even when we know better. And this was my favorite thing he said. I just I like to give entertaining speeches about Robert Louis Stevenson, and he wrote the book that Paul Faulkner was referring to. But Paul Faulkner said this. He said, "It doesn't take Dr. Jekyll's chemistry to release our Mr. Hyde. Let someone puncture our ego, and Mr. Hyde breaks loose from our control, asserting himself in malice and violence." And I really like that. But the first man we read about in the Bible to discover the explosive power of a quick flash of anger was Cain. Moved by envy and jealousy toward his brother Abel, he exploded into a rage which ended in his brother's murder. That we read about that in Genesis 4, verses 1 through 8. So the first thing to understand about anger is that by the time you lose control, you're out of control. That's why it's important to get a handle on it early. And we're going to talk about some things that might help us get a handle on it. But first, I want to share some truths about anger. First, anger has a very bad effect upon our bodies. It upsets digestion. It sends a dangerous supercharge of blood to the heart, brain, lungs, and large muscles. It causes your eyes to dilate, and maybe that's why we sometimes say, "I'm so angry I can't see straight." A Duke University group found that anger produces 2 to 5 times the death rate as does high blood pressure and smoking. Second, anger prevents problem solving. The ability to think logically and problem solve is gone when we get angry. Two people can begin to discuss a problem and go along just fine working that problem out until one of them becomes angry, and at that point the other person usually gets angry too. Then the anger escalates, and they usually lapse into stony silence. A man by the name of David Mace did some research on this, and he found that about 68% of problems are never resolved because anger shuts down the problem-solving process. A third truth about anger is that it distorts the truth. When you're angry, you make great big overblown statements like, "You're always late," "You never shut the door," but that's, of course, an exaggeration. And fourth, anger is addictive. Our actions form habits, good or bad. If we become angry repeatedly as our way of handling a problem, it can become addictive. Pretty soon, anger is the only way we know how to respond to a problem. He said, just remember, if you give a speech when you're angry, and I told you I like to give those entertaining speeches, it'll be the best speech you'll ever regret. And who do we get mad at? It's the people closest to us. They are the people we make those speeches to that we regret. You know, we don't get mad at the governor of Connecticut. We probably don't even know who the governor of Connecticut is, but we get mad at those people who are closest to us. That's the reason it doesn't help to change mates, jobs, or move to a different city. All we do when we do that is change the people close to us who will have to endure our uncontrolled anger. The real cure is to work at handling our uncontrolled anger, not changing those with whom we vent it. So now we want to talk about some things that might help us get a better control of our anger. And one thing he said was to let go of unrealistic expectations. He talked about Jesus and the 10 lepers. Ron talked about them this morning also. But he asked the question, only one of them returned to say thank you. 9 of them didn't. He said, was Jesus angry about that? And he said, no. Disappointed, yes, but angry, no. He knew people would not always respond the way he would like for them to. And the point, this was a quote from someone, but I think it made a good point. It said, if you expect perfection from people, your whole life will be a series of disappointments, grumbling, and complaints. If, on the contrary, you pitch your expectations low, taking folks as the inefficient creatures which they are, you are frequently surprised by having them perform better than you had hoped. So he's just saying if you're just expecting perfection all the time, you're going to be disappointed and upset and angry. But if you just let it be a surprise when they are behaving perfectly, then that'll be a good thing for you. And then he talked about preventing anger, and he said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of apologies. And I think we'd all agree with that. James said, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, in James 1, verse 19. And one thing he said we could do was when we see signs of anger in someone, and I want to talk just a minute about what signs of anger are. I thought this was good to remember. He talked about our tone changes when we are angry. I thought about Ralph's lesson last year on tone, about the tone. That was a really good lesson last year, and we talked about that. But when we are angry, our tone or our voice is higher, louder, more strained. Or sometimes we talk with a staccato inflection of our voice. And that's where, in order to make your angry point with someone, you begin to emphasize every single word that you say. And I can really relate to that. I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but Polly, sometimes when I get angry, I do that. And she said, she always tells me, I wish I could get you on video so you could see yourself. So I'm glad I don't have any of that video to show tonight. But that's one sign. Another one is lapsing into total silence. And finally, a sign would be being, if you were looking at someone else, it would be their being red-faced. Now, we couldn't see our own red face, but we could probably feel the heat rising if we were starting to get angry. But he said if you do detect these signs, let's say in someone else, that they're starting to get angry, you might say something like, I must have messed up. I must have said the wrong thing. Help me out here. Where did I go wrong? And when they tell you, you might be able to follow up that with, well, that's not what I meant to say. Let's come at it a different way. So maybe in that way you kind of head it off at the pass, as they say, and prevent the anger from ever increasing. He quoted Charles Schulz in a Peanuts comic strip, it says, "A kiss on the nose turneth away wrath." So that's kind of a paraphrase of Proverbs 15, verse 1. But the idea is to prevent anger. And this goes along with it. He said, sometimes we make ourselves angry by reading things from a negative viewpoint, and then we choose to become angry about them. And he gave the example of driving down a 2-lane road, and maybe someone speeds around you and very quickly cuts back in front of you. And one way you can respond to that is, you can get mad and immediately assume that that person had no good reason for such a ridiculous action. And allow yourself to become angry. He said, but what you could do in another way, you could think, like probably happened to you before, you come out and go around somebody and you didn't see how close that oncoming car was, so you have to kind of cut back in front. So you might think, well, maybe that's what happened. Or he said, you might think, well, maybe it's possible that he had a sick child he was trying to get to the hospital. But it may be that he was just doing some ridiculous thing like we first talked about. But if you give him the benefit of the doubt and think in those ways yourself, then it'll keep us from getting all angry about the situation. A third thing he said he also gave this idea on keeping our anger from exploding. And it made me think of Proverbs 22, verse 24. It says, "A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control." And he talked about delaying the explosion. Maybe you realize you're starting to get angry. And he said, first try to count to 10. And if that don't work, try to count to 100. And if that don't work, try to count to 200. But he said we need to give ourselves some cooling off time. And then he talked about going for a walk. I know I could relate to that because one time I was at a family get-together, and I won't tell you all the details, but someone was talking about something that a situation in a family that, in my family of origin, I kind of had that situation, but this person was talking about this situation as though there's only one way to ever deal with that. And, I'm over here and I'm thinking, well, that's easy for you to say. You don't have that situation. And so I was just kind of getting a little upset. But what I decided to do, I just went out and took a walk, and it really, really did help because I was able to calm down and able to process what that person was saying and understanding where they were coming from, but also just kind of just, be able to calm down and, not be angry anymore. So I came back, and then, of course, they were talking about something else then, and all worked out fine. And I was glad that I had taken that walk. Another thing he said you could do, you could write it out. One thing about writing it down is that it can be erased. But you can't erase angry words once they've been spoken. And I know I've done that at times too, written it down, and a day later or something, you read all those things you thought and felt, and you say, man, I'm glad I didn't say any of that. Because, by that time you got it worked out, and you thought, well, that's way overblown to to respond in that way. Or at least that was my experience. Okay, but he said when anger can't be prevented, hopefully we can prevent it, but when it can't, these are 4 steps to take in order to process our anger in a healthy way. First, he talked about giving permission to be angry. In Ephesians 4, verse 26, it says, "Be angry and sin not, and do not let the sun go down upon your anger." So it seems that he's acknowledging that we're going to be angry with people at times. And we need to give people permission to be angry, but we need, of course, to express it in a positive way. And I know I used to do that with my son Joseph when he was coming along. I would tell him, Joseph, it's okay for you to be angry, and you can express your anger, but, you need to do it in a respectful way. And we worked well with that. He said it in here, and Jerry Barber used to say it, it's okay to be mad, glad, sad, all those emotions. Those are just emotions. They're neither right or wrong. It's just how you handle them. And so I would tell Joseph, and Joseph would tell me sometimes, I don't feel good about you right now. I can't remember what the other things we said, but stuff like that. And that always helped. God is talking about what the situation was, and sometimes he was certainly justified to be mad at me. As we went along, he had muscular dystrophy. I had to help him put on his clothes and stuff, and so sometimes I'd get a little careless, and I'd put on his shirt and bump him upside the head or something. I'd say, Joseph, I said, I'm sorry, I was an accident. And he'd quote a line from Dennis the Menace, if you ever saw that one with Walter Matthau. He says, there's not going to be any more accidents, he'd tell me. So we got along real good with that. But give people permission to be angry. And report feelings of anger. It's not good to keep them bottled up inside. It's good if we can talk it out. And this keeps it from building up inside of us and lead to an explosion. We might say it makes me angry when this happens, and then talk about it. But one illustration he gave I thought was really good. He talked about a husband that liked to help his wife sometimes clean off the table or something. And that was a good thing, but what he was doing, the husband would take the onion, raw onion, and he wouldn't wrap it up or anything. He'd just put the raw onion in the refrigerator. And later on, she was having to clean out the refrigerator because that smell had gotten on other things. And so instead of talking to him about it, this went on for 17 years. She would just, do that and not say anything about it. And then one day he put the onion in there and she laid him out. And he said, all that over just one lousy onion? But he said, it wasn't one lousy onion, it was 17 years of lousy onions. So it's better to, report the feelings of anger and deal with it as it comes up. And he said also you need to make a no-hurt contract with your friend or mate or whatever it is, that you're not going to hurt one another verbally or physically. And then I thought this last one suggestion he made reflected a high level of maturity, and maybe someday I'll get there, but I'm not there now. It says you might ask the person with whom you're angry, will you help me work through my anger? I need you to help me get over it. We may need help from this person to process the anger so we can get beyond it. It permits you to report your anger without attaching any blame for the anger. And so I just say that reflects a high level of maturity. But he also gave some good thoughts on conflict resolution, which are important in working things out in a good way. He said, first, be understanding before you seek to be understood. And that just means like maybe if you're talking with someone, you try to reflect back on what you thought you heard them saying, and is this what you were saying? Just try to understand them before you seek to be understood, he said. And then he said, give in on issues you don't care one way or other about. And the example he used in the book was about a car, color of a car, and he didn't really care, and so he thought it'd just be best to, since it didn't matter to him, just let her make that decision. And he said we should all try to, when we can, work out problems in a win-win situation where we try to find an agreeable solution where both people gain something. For example, if she wants to go to vacation in Kentucky and you want to go to Florida, you might say, well, why don't we go to Kentucky this year and maybe next year go to Florida? Bargain like that. And then finally, he said we should, when nothing else will work, there are going to be times we have to agree to disagree. And he told a funny story about that, about a thermostat. He believed that the experts said that you should just find the right temperature and just keep it on that all the time for maximum efficiency and comfort. He says the only problem is those experts don't live with Gladys. That's just why. And this is what Gladys had to say, because he tried to explain to her how a thermostat worked, and she said, yes, Paul, I know there are two little pieces of metal that are bonded together, and they wiggle back and forth to adjust the temperature. But the problem is that they don't know when I'm cold and want to be warm, and they don't know when I'm hot and want to be cool. So she's going to keep adjusting that thermostat, and he's just going to have to live with it, basically. They're going to have to agree to disagree, basically, in that situation. He said their marriage was too important to let something little like that come between it. So hopefully these ideas can help us keep our anger in control and help us keep cool even when we're hot. And most important, help us keep in a right relationship with God and with one another. If tonight anyone is subject to the Lord's invitation, would like the prayers of the congregation, or would like to maybe put Christ on in baptism, whatever your need might be, we have the opportunity to respond at this time, and one of our elders will meet you at the back as together we stand and sing.
I